Dear viewers, heads up. If you notice that my eyes are quite red during this interview, I promise I was not on meth. I had not just cried, and I had slept the night before. What happened was, I went to a Comic-Con the day before recording, and I was in cosplay and wearing contact lenses. And I believe there must have been something weird about my contact lens solution because it irritated my eyes. So that's the explanation. And now, let's go straight into the interview. Yo, dear listeners, hello and welcome back to the show. Today I have a brand new guest with me, and her name is Lucy. Lucy, welcome to the show.
Hi.
So Lucy was just telling me off camera and off the record that this is her first podcast interview, so it's going to be very special. And I really want to talk to her about her journey with fitness and with being transgender. And I also want to. Oh, I don't know where I'm going with that actually. Yeah, I want to have a candid conversation with her about her story, and I'm not sure where else my mind was going with that, so I'm going to end the introduction here. Lucy, I usually ask my guests an icebreaker question, but because that question is basically about who they are, I am going to weave that question into the conversation, and I'm going to start by asking you, in your view, which of your two journeys started first, the fitness journey or the transgender journey, and how did that start?
Oh, geez. Well, I don't think they were both commingled exactly. But I've known I was trans since I was very, very young. And it's so that's been a long journey that started as soon as I was, um, old enough to kind of understand there was a difference there. I'm 32, so it's a little bit different now where I live than it was when I was growing up, in terms of access to resources. So I wasn't able to start my transition until a little later on in life, but that has been sort of a lifelong thing that I've always known about and been working towards. And fitness has always been really important, but come and gone from my life. I've gone through like many periods of different types of fitness and different needs for that. And the general like sport and athletics has kind of been different than getting into bodybuilding recently. So it's all kind of been like a fun mishmash, and then realizing how they work together now too.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. How did you know that you were trans when you were really young, especially with, the lower access to resources? We're at a similar age. I'm turning 30 this year, so I think I can picture what kind of resources you might or might not have had access to.
Exactly right. So yeah, like in the 90s, early 2000s, where I grew up was a very like small country town. People just didn't even talk about that. Trans wasn't a word that I even knew. I didn't know that was a thing that could happen. We knew gay, but we didn't know being trans. So I was just kind of at the time a boy, and very effeminate, very kind of queer, and like sort of obviously so. It was something that everybody else sort of realized when I was kind of coming to terms with it. I was still in school, and it was kind of realizing is like, if I'm honest, I realized I was a boy after I realized I was trans, if that makes sense, because I was asking my mother like, why am I not like the other girls and stuff? Why do I look like the boys and not the girls? And she would, you are a boy. And I'm like, but no, I'm not. Like, that's so it kind of, it was realizing that I wasn't what I felt like I was, that kind of made me realize that. But I didn't have words for that. There was no terminology. All I knew in that culture was that people, we only knew gay, and we only knew that being gay was like wrong. You weren't supposed to be that. So I just kind of put it away in myself until maybe I was a teenager in high school taking like classes, anthropology classes, when they started talking about like being intersex, being transgender, those kind of things, that finally made me realize like this is what I've been sort of coping with my whole life. Um, and I guess that would be when I really figured it out.
Yeah, our experiences are very similar. I think the difference is that I I understood that I was a girl, and I had no knowledge that trans men existed. And the only knowledge I had, very little knowledge about being trans, was around the concept of trans women, um,
Uh-huh.
for some reason. But all I knew was, well, I am not a man trying to that who feels like a woman, and so that clearly being trans doesn't apply to me. For some reason, my brain didn't think, what if there could be people born in a female body who believe they are a man as well? I don't know why I didn't make that connection, but the point was, well, I know I'm a tomboyish girl, and I know I like girls, so I guess I'm just a butch lesbian. And it wasn't until I went to university and I moved to the UK, where I experienced a lot of gender diversity, that I started to understand actually there are other gender identities beyond girl, guy, and trans woman that I could potentially identify with. So we're very much on the same wavelength. And you've mentioned that from a fitness perspective, you've tried a lot of different avenues over the years. And the most recent one is bodybuilding, which we will get to because, as you know, that's my passion. But it sounds like you got into this somewhat recently relative to sports and athletics. So I'm wondering, how did you get into sports and athletics when you were young? And how did you, what was your relationship with it, knowing deep down that you were trans?
Yeah. Oh, that's a great one. So like the town I grew up in, our culture for that is like very sports oriented. It was like a sports town. So we were always in that, even like as early as a kid. We did t-ball, we did wrestling, baseball. I never played football, but that was big in our town, that kind of thing. But so I was on all the like the general team sports. And like honestly, I was never good at it. I was not much of an athlete. And I think it had to do with that I associated sports with boys. And I kind of had, even though that's not correct, right? Like girls are perfectly capable and awesome in sports, but at the time I as a child I associated that. And so I had a hard time being part of it. I didn't want to be. I was a lot more of like, I guess what you'd say, like a theater kid. I really liked to draw. I liked to act and perform. So I just kind of like, I was always like one of the worst on the teams. I'd just be like goofing off in outfield while everyone was taking it very seriously. Um, and I was not very competitive in sports at the time. And that traveled through all my life in like middle school and high school. I was part of some teams. I did gymnastics, I did martial arts. Um, and what happened was during puberty, due to like a combination of factors, I gained like a ton of weight. I was quite big in high school, and at the time there was not really a body positive culture at all. That was seen as like a very terrible thing. And I was like notably obese and very big, and I wasn't able to cope with that. People were very, very mean about it. Um, and so I got really into fitness for like weight loss and doing stuff like that, weightlifting. And I started getting into the gym at my school, weightlifting, just doing general workouts, learning like bigger, faster, stronger, like athletic lifting and strength training, powerlifting type stuff. Um, and that really changed my life because, like, aside from just the fact that it helped me change my body image a little bit, Like, I just really fell in love with the gym in general, with lifting weights, with getting stronger, and seeing how, um, at the time I associated like getting smaller, getting skinnier with being a good thing, which has since changed as I've matured and as culture's gotten better, right? But um the big byproduct of that was seeing how it changed my ability to like be able to run, be able to breathe better, be stronger, and be able to lift and just feel better in my body. It really just changed my whole outlook and made me fall in love with fitness. And I've just been really into it off and on throughout my life ever since then.
That's amazing. And I'm wondering, when you gained weight and you said because of a combination of factors, how did that change your, well, or rather, how did the change in your body affect your relationship with your gender identity, if it did at all?
Oh, I mean, I think it had to do with the gender identity a little bit because you might be able to relate to this. I think a lot of trans people go through this period where, especially if you knew beforehand, puberty is a very scary, confusing thing. It is for cis people too. Puberty is horrible for everybody. Um, but for me in particular, puberty was a really hard time of life because I knew I wanted I knew that I felt I was a girl and I wanted to be. I was being told that I wasn't and was kind of learning to cope and deal with not being a girl and to like sort of act like a boy, act like a man, the compulsory like heterosexuality of trying to fit in, but always in the back of my head thinking, nobody knows, but I know I'm a girl. And it like pre-puberty, you're kind of able to um, cope with it by like, for me, it was the androgyny of it. Before you develop, everyone sort of can be similar. I just grew out my hair longer and dressed a certain way, and I kind of felt like it made me feel happy with myself. But then you start hitting puberty and you develop your male characteristics, you start getting hairy, you start getting your fat distributes in different ways, and you start obviously not looking like a girl, and it's a trip. It sucks, it's hard, and it really kind of, I think that caused a lot of depression in me, and the depression led to like introversion, avoiding people, avoiding activity, um like stress eating, comfort eating and stuff, and that caused me to gain the weight, and it was compounding because I felt as I got bigger, I was like softer and squishier. I felt more feminine in that way. So it's all because also there's a people hesitate to associate being muscular with women. So my head was all kind of messed up at the time, and yeah, it was a very confusing, like depressed area of my life that caused me to fall into that and kind of cope with it from there. Yeah.
I can definitely relate to that because, as you said, before I hit puberty, I could deal with the fact that I wasn't a boy, even though at the time, as I told you, I didn't really know that I was, but I knew there was something different about me that I then labeled as being a butch lesbian, even though that was incorrect. But it was easy to ignore while my chest was flat and I didn't have a period. And then when my period came and my chest started to grow, something that my mother said encapsulates my experience quite well. I was actually impressed that she was that perceptive at the time. Once I came out to her as trans, she told me, that explains why you were so upset when your breasts grew, because I did not, she said, I could not believe that you could be so upset It didn't make sense to me, and now it does. And I was like, wow, I didn't realize that it was that obvious. And as a result of that, I was also overweight, and people were mean to me about that. So there were these two factors combining that led to me actually going in the opposite direction to you, where I fully committed to weight loss and weight loss at any cost, which basically meant I just didn't eat, essentially. I ate very little. I developed what I would call orthorexia, in that I had a list of good foods that I would eat in very small quantity, and I did a lot of cardio, and I saw a lot of weight loss, but it was also more weight loss than I needed because I did start with overweight, but I didn't need to lose as much weight as I did. But when I did, I became so thin that that my chest flattened and I lost my period because of the reduced sex hormone production that comes with malnutrition. And when that happened, in hindsight, when I started examining my life at the time when I was at university, I realized, oh, I probably maintained these eating disorder behaviors because it allowed me to look more like a boy. It gave me a more of
Wow.
an androgynous look. And at the time, I didn't know. Like when I was diagnosed with anorexia, and I thought I really want to recover from this, I started researching and reading blogs and stories about people with the same disease or mental illness. And I never could relate to them because I was reading girls' stories and I couldn't relate to their motives at all. So, in hindsight, at university, when I started thinking about how that made me feel, it all clicked for me that at least one of the causing factors was gender dysphoria, and I just didn't know it at the time.
Totally. Yeah, that's extremely relatable. We all, I think as trans people, like both trans men and trans women, have a really interesting experience with like not only your gender but your body image as it relates to that for those kind of reasons. And I can relate to like what you went through. That's a real experience and a hard one because then it's the ways you learn to cope with it aren't always the healthiest ways and you can overcorrect. And like I ended up doing the same thing is where I overcorrected to be like obsessive about being skinny for quite a while, and it was not the best. Not that's not a healthy long-term solution to like losing weight, and also you don't have to lose that much weight. You don't necessarily have to. There's not a problem with being bigger, right? Um, so we both kind of had to go through that experience of compensating for our dysphoria and then overcompensating. And I feel like that's really common for trans people.
I feel the same way, especially because the rates of eating disorder and disordered eating in our community are relatively high, considering. And I
Huge.
think the
Yeah.
experience is exactly that. I've met clients who got too big because they developed, well, they were softer if they were trans women, or vice, even trans men feel comfortable being bigger because when you have more body fat, then your breasts, if you haven't got top surgery, are less obvious because you also have a belly and you have fat all over. And then vice versa, I've met people who, like me, went through a period of excessive restriction because whether you are born female or born male, you become more androgynous when you are really thin. So if that aligns with your gender identity, you're going to feel pulled to that. And then there are people like you who went a bit all over the place in trying to find the balance. And then luckily for you and for myself as well, we are closer to having a balance now.
Right.
So circling back to when you developed that love for the gym and because you saw how much better it was making you feel and how much more capable it was making you feel about your body, you also mentioned that prior to that you associated muscle with being a man. So it sounds like before you got into the gym and lifting, you wouldn't really have it wouldn't have resonated with you to lift weights for that reason. So I'm wondering, when you discovered that the gym was doing such wonders for you, how did the switch from associating muscle with being a man to being passionate about it and about lifting. How did the switch come about for you?
Oh, that's a great question. It's a little complicated, because if I'm totally honest with you, that particular association hasn't occurred to me until pretty recently, like within the last few years. And that's, that's just my own personal associations. Some people are ahead of the curve on that, and I really respect that, and they were inspirational to me. But um, I didn't begin to associate like muscularity and that with my own femininity until like very recently. And I think when I was younger, it had to do like I didn't fully accept my gender for quite a long time. And so when I started lifting originally in high school, it was a mode of repression. At that time in my life, I was going full bore on like I didn't have access to hormones or insurance. We weren't financially viable to do that, and I didn't have somebody I felt trustworthy to do that with. And my solution to that was basically just to sort of really try as hard as I could to accept being a man and go like full bore at it. And speaking earlier of overcompensation, I did that with my gender where I went really hard for several years at trying to be like cis man, very like I was openly bisexual, so I was always on the queer spectrum, but I went very hard on like hyper masculinity, like trying to get stronger, trying to get like muscles and look more like a man in some way to try and sort of hide what was going on with me. And so there was kind of honestly a toxic relationship with my underlying thing with my muscularity is where like when I was younger and getting stronger and gaining musculature and getting fit, I saw it as a good thing because I was becoming the man that society wanted me to be and associating that muscularity with masculinity specifically. And so I wanted to avoid any way of being seen as feminine because I thought, my secret will be out. I won't be safe. People won't like me. Which obviously was not the case. I can't overstate how much better my life is being open and being myself now. But at the time, you don't see that. And so I went through those periods, and recently, now that I've been able to transition for several years now and to get more comfortable in myself and to learn what femininity really means and what it means for me, I've sort of been able to commingle. When I started transition, I wanted to do everything I could to look softer and to look more classically feminine and to avoid being seen as masculine in any way. And I think we can agree, like everybody can acknowledge that society at large has the conception that muscles are for men. You're masculine if you're muscular. And there's been a really beautiful cultural push, like online in the industry, just in general, to see like, well, you have muscles and you're a woman, so they're women's muscles. Like having a muscle doesn't make you a man, right? And that's really blown my mind. There's been like people out online who are very prominent, who are super inspirational to me, where they're very open, and that just makes you see that you can do it and you can be loved and seen as in that way. And it made me a lot more comfortable with realizing that I've kind of really more resonated with being like, even if it is a little androgynous or whatever, like I would rather be a strong, muscular woman than be not strong or be the classic feminine ideal. And you can make femininity what it means. You can make it your own, whatever it means for you.
Absolutely. I'm really glad that you've been able to have the change of minds in that regards. And I'm wondering, so at this moment in time, when we started talking about, when we started this our conversation, you said that you've gotten into bodybuilding somewhat recently. So how long ago was it exactly, and why did you get into it to begin with?
I probably first started. I've always appreciated it from afar and like thought it was cool, but I never thought it was for me or something I wanted to do. And I started when I started my transition. Oops, sorry. Hey, Gordita, can you? Sorry, my dog's up on my cords. Lay down, honey.
No worries.
Um, so when I started my transition, um, I was a bit smaller, um, probably smaller than I am now, but not muscular. And I had this idea in my head that had occurred to me is that since I started my physical transition a little bit later in life, that, hormones wouldn't be as effective for me, since I've already gone fully through puberty. And that I would have to find some alternative ways to like make my body look the way I want it to look. And I'm certainly not the first person to think that like you could use the art of bodybuilding, like the same theory, to change your body. But my particular view on it was like, well, I don't have to get big and muscular, but I can use the same techniques to like get bigger hips, make my waist smaller so that my figure looks a little more feminine, right? And so that was kind of where I was at with that, where I decided I kind of wanted to start using those bodybuilding techniques for that. And that involved, for the first few years of transition, gaining a lot of weight again so that I could get fat to redistribute. And then for the last few years, losing all of that weight again to see how it sits on your body again. And it was in my opinion, a stunning success. Like I went from very top heavy and very like thin to having like what I would consider a very feminine figure. And it's worked fabulously for me and made me feel so good about myself. And then getting into competitive bodybuilding was just a matter of taking the weight loss journey to the natural conclusion of I'm already cutting, I'm already putting on this muscle, like let's just see if we can do it. Let's just go for it. And that's how I ended up going that way with it.
And that was a pretty stunning success as well, given that you competed in the IATBP competition just a few months ago, and you ended up becoming their bikini champion for 2025. So congrats on that.
Thank you.
Was that your very first prep?
Yes.
And you were self-coached?
Yeah, I did self-coaching, self-planning. I had people offering advice, like some really great people who I talked to and chatted, but I did everything myself. Yeah.
How did you find the prep itself in terms of in comparison to just doing, a cut?
Oh my. It's hard. Like obviously it's hard. And it's difficult and pretty grueling, especially the last month of it and peak week. But if I'm honest, at that point, I had been losing. The competition for me is at the tail end of like 110 pounds of weight loss. I went from 280 to my stage weight was 163. Um,
That's
so I lost.
amazing.
Thank you. Yeah, I lost a ton of weight, and at that point, I'd been cutting for like 2.5 or 3 years. So if I'm honest, prep was just, it wasn't that different from what I was already doing. It was so habitual that it was just continuing what I was already doing. It didn't feel that different. Just
Yeah, that
more
makes sense.
extreme for sure. Yeah.
Especially, I would imagine, in those final few weeks leading up to peak week when you are the leanest that you're going to be.
So rough.
Yeah, that makes complete sense to me. So let me get this straight. So when you got into bodybuilding, you thought, I can use these techniques to change my body in a more gender affirming way. So you decided to, I don't know if you would have called it a bulk at at that point, but essentially what happened was that you gained weight, and it sounds like you gained more weight than you planned to, or maybe you intended on gaining that much weight. And then you decided that you would want to lose it to see if you had gained muscle in the places where you wanted, and that if with hormone therapy your fat was redistributing in a way that was more gender affirming for you. Is that right?
I believe so. Yeah. In terms of gaining more than I wanted, it got away from me because at that time when I was gaining most of the weight, it was also right when COVID-19 had hit. So we were on quarantine and just comfort eating, staying at home, very sedentary. So I was kind of planning on gaining a little just to get some more fat on my bones, but it kind of accelerated exponentially. So
That
I
makes
gained a
sense.
lot more than I had expected. And then I'm so sorry. What was the other part of that you were asking?
Oh, I was just summarizing the journey to get an idea of the timeline. So it sounds like you gained the weight, it got out of control for you, and that's when you committed to this prolonged cut that culminated with the prep and then the competition.
Yeah, exactly.
So you've mentioned a couple of times how you wanted to get a bit more fat on your body when you started bodybuilding. So to get an idea, would this have been at that time when, at the tail end of this phase where you said that you became a bit too obsessed with being skinny, and then you realized, okay, now I've gone too far, and that's why you wanted to regain a bit of weight, or was the timeline different?
Yeah. No, you're pretty much right on. For most of my like 20s, I was just very I don't know that it necessarily ever dipped into the realm of anorexia, but I was very, very focused on being fit to the point where it was detrimental. I was focused on being like low body fat, leaner, that kind of thing, and that lasted all the way up until transition and that weight gain at the beginning of transition.
Thank you for clarifying. And now I want to linger a little bit on the experience of the competition day itself. So this was your very first competition. Had you been to a bodybuilding show before?
No, that was well, yeah, I'd seen shows, I'd watched them online. I'd never been in person. I'd gone to a couple like NPC seminars just to sort of learn what the whole thing was about beforehand. But I watched all the IATBP shows on YouTube beforehand, just trying to get my feel for what it was. But that was my first time ever at an official event or getting anywhere near the stage. Yeah.
Super exciting. And how was it for you? How did you feel when you stepped on stage?
Oh, it's a blur, it's a rush. It's very exciting and it's a beautiful experience. It's really great and amazing and satisfying. The IATBP especially is very like it really hit me how important and impactful that is to have that space for people like us where we're not included in those sports and even ostracized or stigmatized especially, and having a space that's just for us and hearing everyone's stories was very like inspirational and special. So great. And the other side of that is that it goes by like in a flash. It's years of preparation for a couple minutes on stage, and by the time you're off, you don't even realize it happened. Like,
Yeah, that's so true. And just for the listeners, I'm assuming here that people have are OG listeners and watchers and they've or viewers and they've been listening to the podcast for a while. But to clarify for everyone, dear listeners, the IATBP is the International Association of Trans Bodybuilders and Powerlifters. And every year, so far in America, they have a show in Atlanta for us trans and non-binary and generally gender diverse people, which is incredible. And I did record an interview with them a few months ago, so just scroll back through the list of podcast episodes and you're going to be able to find that one and learn more about the competition. In any case, Lucy, I'm really glad that you had such a fun experience. I'm wondering what you liked best: posing, the prep itself, or any other aspect of the process of getting ready for competition? What's something that stood out for you?
Oh, definitely just the prep and the process itself. The training is kind of my bread and butter. If I'm honest with you, I'm a bit of an alternative person. So the posing and the beautification, like getting a tan, doing the special makeup and all this, is not something I particularly enjoy. I feel it feels like a bit of a dog and pony show, you know? You're showing yourself off to literally be judged by other people physically, and it's a little like I don't love that aspect of it, but I'm just competitive and want to do it. So it's like, okay. But the thing I really enjoy is training and pushing yourself to the absolute limit, and the prep and the like figuring things out and figuring out how it works, trying to just make sure that your method works for you and getting there and then getting on stage and competing or winning, but even just getting up there and getting the feedback from the judges and the other competitors and knowing that you did it and you went the distance. Like that's unbeatable. That feels so good.
And then I'm wondering, you got to the competition, and once the competition was over, that big goal was ticked off. You obviously ticked off the massive goal of losing over 100 pounds. So where did that leave you? How did you feel right after it was all done? And what did you set as a new goal since?
I felt hungry, Nikias. I felt I felt so hungry. And I had just been looking forward to it for ages. I ate so clean for like a solid year or two there with some like treat days and refeeds in between, of course. Like it's not all just chicken and broccoli, but I was just so my mind, the food noise was high. My mind was all on just eating. And so I was just, and I was in Atlanta, which I'm not sure if you're familiar, but in America, it's known for really good food. So my wife and I just spent some time getting donuts, pizza, chicken, all the stuff that I couldn't have, just for a short bit to let me enjoy it before I got back on like a more healthy regimen. But that was it. And then outside of that, I honestly, it felt a little weird because I've been so focused on the competition for so long that after the competition happened, excuse me, um, I kind of didn't know what to do with myself for like a week or two. I took time off from the gym to recover. I was eating just to sort of like get my body back in a natural place from being stage lean, and I just kind of felt like, what do I even do now? Like this has been my goal for so long and I've been working hard at it, but like I don't know what to do with this now. So it was just a little odd. I kind of was it was a vacation, but it felt a little weird. I felt a little like almost a little depressed.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's when you are anticipating such a big high and then the high happens, sometimes the low afterwards can be just as low in magnitude, if that makes sense.
Exactly. Yeah.
And once you, I'm assuming you said you spoke in the past, so it sounds like you overcame this low. What did you settle on as your next goal? What are you working towards right now in fitness wise, if anything?
I'm still figuring it out a little bit. I'm not I'm back in the gym, I'm back to training. Right now, my overall goal is to just bulk and get bigger because this is my first weight cycle of like officially bodybuilding, getting big and then getting small again. And I don't plan on getting as big as I was by any stretch for sure, but now that I'm in shape, in stage shape, like, and I've gained it back over the next couple months, it's like I want to do just like a good bulk and start building up muscle. Ideally, I would be a lot bigger than I am, like muscular wise. I really would love to someday be able to do like figure or even physique, but my body is a little smaller than that because of all the weight loss. And the reason I went for bikini was just that it was the closest to me after all my weight loss. Like I don't think I would have been able to bring a good package for bodybuilding. And also because Josie Davis, the woman who does the bodybuilding category, is just so amazing that she'd be super hard to compete with if I wasn't bringing my absolute best.
Yeah, fair
so,
enough.
um, so I'd like to get bigger. I'm trying to just build muscle and get a little bigger. I'd like to have a more strong physique that's not as typically feminine and certainly not as thin as the bikini category. The bikini category is not my ideal. So I'd like to have a fuller figure and be bigger. And that's my general goal. In terms of bodybuilding, I'm not even totally sure, honestly, if I want to continue competing. Like I told you before, the competition itself was sort of just to prove that I could do it to myself. And now I'm figuring out if I want to continue fitness just for myself, or if I want to compete, if I want to look into the NPC or the OBC, if it's possible. It's a little hard as a trans woman because of the stigma. Like I'm not sure what I could do and if I could be accepted. Um, Especially as someone who's very open. Like I never want to hide that I'm trans and I want to be able to compete, but I don't. So I don't know. The goal right now is to get big and share my story and just help people, help people who are on a similar journey and help them like build their bodies up in that way.
I'm really glad that well, no, I'm really glad. I am glad that you had a positive experience with bodybuilding, but also I can relate to what you're saying when you say, I don't know if I'm gonna compete again. I've not competed yet, and I originally was pretty confident that I would. And then I've had a few health bumps along the way. I've also realized that I'm never going to be competitive in bodybuilding, and that because of the malnutrition that I went through when I had anorexia, I don't know that I want to put my body through that again because the health bumps were all consequences of anorexia that came back to bite me in the butt even 5-10 years later. So
Oh
I'm
wow.
wondering, I don't know that I want to go back there. At the same time, I am tempted to, because from a psychological perspective, as you say, I want to prove to myself that I can do that and then recover and not have any kind of relapse, which I'm pretty confident I wouldn't have so far into my personal recovery. So I am ambivalent about that. But it sounds like at this moment in time, you are excited about building muscle. And I am excited for you as well. And you mentioned you want a bigger figure all over. I'm wondering if you have any more specific physique goals than that you're focused on in your training right now.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, like I feel like I've gotten my figure to a point where I personally consider it feminine and I like that. But now I would like to see it become just generally visibly stronger. Because I can be toned, but my muscle development is rather small and immature in the grand scheme of bodybuilding. There's women with incredible physiques, just blow you away. And I'd like to build up my upper body a little bit again, because after the weight loss, I lost so much of that, and proportionally it's nice, but I don't feel as strong up there. I feel like my legs are probably my my strongest area right now. Um, and so I'd like to see that, and just maybe even look a little more intimidating now.
Ah, that would be awesome. I'm looking forward to following you and seeing what you get up to with your bodybuilding journey. I, I'm curious. You don't have to share this if you don't want to, but I am very non-judgmental. I'm going to ask if you are planning on staying natural. I always
Oh,
hesitate
please,
to
yeah.
use this word with trans people because technically we're not natural. Like, I'm not a natural male without testosterone. I don't produce my own. So, but what I mean is, are you planning on keeping your testosterone levels and hormone levels overall within typical biological female levels, or are you thinking of using performance enhancing drugs?
That's an amazing question, especially for this topic. It's such an interesting thing that we could get into. I'm sure you think about it a lot, just like I do. Like it's for like the first thing is like, are we natural as trans people, as trans competitors? Like, should we be considered natty, right? Because we're taking hormones to be who we are, but those hormones are like natural hormones. It's different for trans men because trans men are taking often like TRT, something that's considered like specifically a banned substance for bodybuilding. For I think a lot of the leagues, if I'm not mistaken, consider progesterone and estrogen to be admissible because some of the female competitors are going through menopause or something like that. So it's like those are judged a little less harshly. But I'm never quite sure if I should consider myself natty or not for that reason. I don't take any other kind of performance enhancing drug for the physique currently. Um and it also I have it's called mild androgen insensitivity, which is part of my development as I developed much later in life. So I've always had lower testosterone levels, and it now after I'm coming up on I think 5 years of the current cycle of hormonal transition for myself, and my blood tests for the last year or two have been like my testosterone is practically non-existent. My estrogen levels are fluctuate between normal cis levels all the way up to the levels that a woman who's pregnant would have. Like, so very, very like honestly at a disadvantage for building muscle. And it's occurred to me like, if I want to build muscle, I think about should I take, I don't know, some type of peptide or anavar or whatever, or should I just stop hormones to get more testosterone and muscle back? But I think it'd be antithetical to what I want to accomplish because I think bodybuilding, the sport, I do love it, but it's never been my primary goal. And I think I've spent so much of my life trying to become who I am that sacrificing that for bodybuilding would be it'd be a little silly for me. So I think I will probably stay natural for the foreseeable future.
Thank you for the honesty. I was keen on asking you that because we have very different perspective as a trans woman and trans man. For me, as you said, since I take testosterone, I can only compete in untested federations, which are federations that accept performance enhancing drugs. And there was a period of my life where I really struggled with the fact that I was taking testosterone because the outside perspective would be that, or at least the general outside perspective for people who aren't in the fitness industry and are less judgmental. Most people see steroids as cheating. So
Right.
I actually had to work with myself to overcome that the feeling, that knowing that aroused in me, because it made me feel like I felt resistant to the idea that people would think that the muscle I was building came out of a vial. I didn't like that because I thought, I am putting in all this effort. I don't want to be treated like that. And so I struggled with the concept of being on testosterone and also um, bodybuilding. And then ultimately, I've come to my personal conclusion, which is that I am natural in that without testosterone, I would not produce it myself. So the level that I'm at is, most of the time my levels fluctuate as well. But now I'm getting to a place with the type of testosterone I'm on and the regularity with which I have it administered to me, which is really working to keep me within just typical male levels. So within that, I think that I am natural because this is where I would be if I had been born in a male body to begin with. So that's how I think about it. And I have thought of performance enhancing drugs just due to being a fitness coach and being aware of them. But ultimately, for me right now, the juice isn't worth the squeeze, meaning that, as I've mentioned, I already have plenty of health issues to deal with as a consequence of anorexia. Then you add to that the additional risks that hormone therapy places on your body, and also people don't realize how many people are actually on PEDs or on steroids because a lot of people don't actually look that impressive on them because testosterone and steroids are going to amplify genetics. So if your genetics are if your genetics are mediocre or average, at best on steroids, you're going to look average or a bit above average. And for me, I know that my genetics aren't particularly good. So for me to put myself at that much risk just to look a bit above average, to me personally, it's not worth it. So that's where I stand at the moment.
Right. And so you brought up something interesting too that I think is that um, it's kind of an open secret that so many people in this industry are on performance enhancing drugs, right? And it people have this tendency to look at it as cheating or wrong or whatever, but it's not just doing doing hormones or doing PEDs doesn't just make you bigger. It's an aid that contributes. It still has so much to do with your biological potential and your training and your thing, and it's not worth it for everybody. It's not right for everybody. And for some people it works and it's okay if it's done in a certain way. I really think I'm really fascinated with the modern trend of people being more open about it, because I think that's really good overall, because if people are going to be doing it anyway, we should be open about the fact that people are doing it and destigmatize it so that people on the outside of the industry can have a healthier view of what these physiques are coming from. And also, just so that I think it can contribute too to the destigmatization of like hormones in general, right? Like looking at how I'm constantly blown away by how similar our journeys as trans people are to people who are bodybuilders. And I make jokes about it all the time, and I think about it a lot, is that performance enhancing drugs are essentially gender affirming care for cis people who are trying to feel better in their physique and their bodies and injecting hormones to get there. I think, uh, it's not right for everybody and it needs to be done carefully. But if I'm honest with you, I'm an advocate for it. And I think if somebody can do it with consent and feel good about it, juice up, man. Like,
Yeah, I do try to be open and honest about it and to invite people who are on steroids as well as off steroids on my podcast because I do want to help shift people's mindset. As I said, I grew up in a society where if you took steroids, you were cheating. And in
Right.
bodybuilding, it's not cheating unless you are taking steroids and then competing in a tested federation where it's not allowed. But if it is allowed, you're not cheating. And as you say, everybody has a right to do what feels best for them. And as I tell my clients, I'm never going to force them to follow any particular plan or to achieve any particular targets. I do my best to set up a plan that's aligned with their goal, but ultimately it's their goal. So I can give them an informed perspective or information so they can come up with their own informed opinion. But ultimately, I'm not there telling them this is bad and this is good. They tell me this is what I want to do. And I tell them these are the pros and these are the cons. And then it's up to them. And I think that when it comes to steroids, it's exactly the same. And it is a positive that I've noticed around what you've said, that people are more open about it, is that there is a model known as the safer use model that's been emerging. So because people have been more open, there has been more education around how to take steroids safely, and so the safer use model has come about. On the other side, unfortunately, there are also a lot more people now who are starting taking steroids really, really young because they see certain physiques they aspire to on social media and they are impatient due to being young. We've all been young. I'm still young. You're
True.
still young. We all know
Yeah.
how impatient we can get and especially the younger you are, the more impatient you are because time seems to pass a lot more slowly when you're younger based on the conversations I've had with people. So these younger lifters will be 19, 20 and think, well, I've been lifting for a year. This is clearly as much muscle as I'm ever going to get unless I jump on gear. And that is an
Right.
unfortunate side effect because something I didn't really linger on, but that you brought up is that yes, steroids amplify genetics, but steroids also amplify your behaviors. So if you're doing training right and you're doing nutrition right and you have great genetics, at that point you're basically going to be Mr. Olympia or Miss Olympia, depending on your chosen gender. But a lot of people at that age, especially, and a lot of people at any age, if depending on their experience, have so much more ground that they could cover just by focusing on getting better at eating in the right way and training in the right way before they need to consider steroids. So if I had to advise anyone or give people information around this, I wouldn't try to force them to choose one way or the other, but I would encourage them to try to make the most of lifestyle, and in particular training and nutrition, stress management and sleep before they take steroids into account. Because if those things aren't in place, the response you're going to get from steroids is going to be pretty suboptimal anyway. So at that point, why risk it? It's much better if you get more out of training and nutrition, and maybe you're happy that way and you don't need steroids. Or if you still feel that you
Exactly.
want them, at least you're going to respond even better to them. That's how I see it.
I completely agree. And you brought up something that makes me want to amend what I said, where it's I agree with you, and I think we're on the same page that it's like it's about autonomy, right? And that if you choose it and think it's the right thing for you, you should it's your right to do that and make that change to your body. But I 100% agree that people really underestimate their natural potential. Training for a year or even two, even three, like you can train for several years and you really have no idea for how much you can develop and grow in that period if you're dedicated. And I really think steroids, you should be allowed to do it and it should be your choice, but it really should be a last resort, or it should be an additional resource outside of the discipline and the habits you build that bring you that bring you your physique and your fitness in the first place. And as far as the trend of younger people doing it, that is a little concerning because I think it's good to destigmatize and stuff, but I think when you're young you can make rash decisions and not understand the consequences. That you say you're 30, I'm just in my early 30s, And we're still young in the grand scheme of things, but we're at the age where we're starting to see the consequences of our younger decisions and the way that catches up with you. Um, and then you still have 60, 70 years to live or something if you're very lucky. Like, so you're going to have to deal with that, and steroids can have huge impacts. Um, and a lot of these people, they're doing it just to get a physique that you see on Instagram. They're not necessarily competitors. They're not invested in the lifestyle of bodybuilding, and you're going to be taking steroids that are going to affect your life forever. Really for no reason, because you could have achieved the same thing natural.
Sometimes, for sure. Not always, but sometimes just by waiting a little longer.
Yeah.
In any case, it was great to get your perspective on this, Lucy. It seems like we're on a similar wavelength. I am curious about competing as a trans woman in in a federation that is primarily for cis people. So the OBC or the NPC that you mentioned earlier, because I mean, for me, it's pretty clear cut, right? I know I'm on steroids, so even though it's TRT, it's still
Right.
banned. People who are on TRT and want to compete in natural federations, they have to be open about it with the organizers, and some feds will allow you to compete, but some and this is untested. This is tested feds, so feds for naturals. Some of them will allow you to compete if you have a doctor's note that says that you are on TRT for medical reasons, like me, but some of them won't. But so for me, the path is a bit more clear cut. But for you, as you said, being on estrogen and progesterone, and for other trans women, sometimes they also take androgen suppressing medication, which, given your condition, I don't think you need. But basically, with that, since you're essentially putting yourself as a disadvantage, you're doing the opposite of taking steroids almost. I'm wondering how a federation would respond to that. I mean, from my perspective, as you say, women going through the menopause take those hormones. So in my view, you would be allowed to compete as they would be, but who knows? It's everything is a bit up in the air when you are trans.
Exactly. It's really it's super interesting to me. I'm not 100% sure on how it works. I'm looking into it now, but we're a gray area that I think cis people don't like to consider. They don't put a lot of thought into it. And it, on some level, it makes sense. We're such a small percent of the population, and how many trans bodybuilders are there? There's a lot that we know because we're keen to know that and network with people, but in the grand scheme of things, it's such a small percentage of the talent pool that it makes sense that they wouldn't consider it, even though they should. But it's a gray area that they don't really consider, and I think when it comes to competing, I'm more concerned with how it's viewed socially, where it's also an open secret that there are quite a lot of trans competitors. I know several girls who compete in NPC or other organizations, IFBB too, like pros and coaches who are trans, but by and large they are stealth or in the closet, like they hide it because of the stigma. And they're able to pass and get through it or something like that, and it's kind of a shame that we can't just be open and compete because of the way that it's viewed as being a biological advantage or being unfair, when if you wanted to have a genuine conversation about it, I think there's a gray area, because who knows if it's fair or not. I really, even as a trans woman, I don't have a good answer for that, because I did go through male puberty, so it's like I'm a bit taller. I guess in theory, maybe my musculature is different. But at the same time, it's like I was very skinny when I started transition. I didn't start with big muscles. Like, I have lower T than most cis women, so my ability to put on muscle is probably harder than most people. Um, but then a lot of people will view it as just I'm inherently have an advantage over a cis woman competing, and so should I compete with them or not? Is that fair? And I really don't know.
You have such a mature view on this because if you look online, people are really split. There are people who are really against all trans people competing, and then people who instead try to make the argument on how it is fair for them to compete under certain circumstances. As you say, I don't have a good answer in that I don't have an answer that covers everyone. I think that human bodies are just too different and respond differently to hormones as well. Like, as you're saying, with your condition, with your androgen, your ability to respond to androgen being suppressed, you are technically in potentially a worse position than a cis woman now that you're transitioning because you have a lower testosterone than they would have. So your case should be considered differently from somebody who went through male puberty and then started transitioning, but maintained the majority of the extra muscle that they had pre-transition and built even more with bodybuilding. And similarly, my case could be considered differently from another trans man who never went through a period of anorexia where I had zero hormones. I had no progesterone, I had no estrogen, I had no testosterone. There was nothing there. So building muscle for me at the time was the hardest that it could ever possibly be because all my body wanted was a little fucking food to put some more fat on my bones. So I agree with you that it's the I don't think there will ever be a clear cut answer. And I think it is down on the individual to get in touch with the organization. And then I think the best that the organization can do is consider the individual case. So take each person as one, an N of one, essentially, as they would say in
Yeah.
scientific research. Unfortunately, that does involve us always outing ourselves, which is not always safe. And I really feel for you on this because I am also aware of my privilege as a trans man in sports. I am considered disadvantaged because I was born a girl. So the societal stigma around trans men in sports is much lower. If anything, maybe somewhat secretly, but not so secretly, cis men don't mind us competing with them because they think they can beat us, which isn't always the case. But that's what you would believe. Whereas
Exactly.
for you, it's obviously the opposite because you were born well, you went through puberty, so supposedly you have some sort of advantage that cis women wouldn't have. So I understand how like you, it's important for me to be visible and be open. I've always been open, and I'm not gonna ever hide who I am unless I perceive it to be unsafe. But at least on the internet, I want to be open. I don't want to pretend. But I also see how if you are interested in the sport, for me, it's easier to be open than it is for you.
Yeah. And I mean, I agree with you 100%. Is I think just on a personal level, I went through decades of repression and dealing with self-image to the point where I don't care about sports or any other stigma. Like I will never be in the closet again in my life. Like I refuse to hide or be stealth. Like I want to be open and share myself, like for myself and just so other people can see it. Um, and when that comes to the sport, that puts you in a tricky place. And like you say, there's a different perception of trans men and trans women, but that doesn't take away from the struggle of trans men in that arena because you're trans men are doomed to ever be like underestimated and not considered and not be part of that conversation. And that's its own type of discrimination. Um, it just so happens that culturally at this point in time, trans women are kind of the scapegoat for that. And it's a huge part of the conversation that people have a misguided notion of the amount of advantage you have and how hormones affect you. And there's so much gray area with how culture has changed where it's not my personal case, but there's a lot of people who transition before puberty now. And those people are, in all intent and purpose, they're biologically identical to their cis counterparts. So should they not be allowed to compete, right? Like, they should have no advantage whatsoever. Whereas you could argue, since I went through puberty, that's different. But we need to be able to have an individual conversation and have just an open dialogue about how that affects people. And I think on the whole, it really doesn't help to just allow trans competitors and allow them to be part of things. I think the idea of discrimination and segregation is always wrong, right? But we can have an honest talk about how our experiences affect competitiveness.
Hopefully, with time, there will be less of an emotional baggage that people outside of the trans community associate with being trans, and there will be more focus on objectively how can we make sports fair for everyone and allow everyone to compete. Because I
Right.
think that right now some people, not everyone, but some people don't even want to try to educate themselves because they have this skewed perspective of the motives that trans people have for transitioning, such as accusing trans people of taking hormones so that they can compete at a higher level.
Right.
But then on the other side, because of all this societal pushback against the trans community, there is also a lack of desire to communicate in a civil manner in the trans community as well. And I think while these two camps are at war, we're not going to have the opportunity for open discourse. But hopefully, with platforms like mine, where I frequently talk to cis coaches and cis experts, and I make it very clear that I am trans, and also by inviting people like you on the podcast so people can hear stories about cis athletes as well as trans athletes, people of all genders, whether cis or gender diverse. I like to think that my platform and the content I try to put out is going to contribute a little bit to bridging that gap. And the more of platforms and content like mine we have, the more the two worlds will come together. Because something that you said that I agree with is that there are a lot of similarities between cis bodybuilders and the trans community. And cis bodybuilders aren't some unicorns. Everybody has feelings about their body, whether they do something about it with bodybuilding or whether they do something about it in other ways. Maybe they dress a certain way, or they take up some other activity or type of performance because that's gender affirming care for them. Everybody has feelings and everybody enacts those feelings in different ways. And I think the more we start to understand that the underlying feeling is the same for everyone, it just takes up different shapes, the more we're going to find similarities between the trans community and the rest of the world, and the more united we will be and be able to have an open discourse. That's my hope, because I like to be optimistic.
I totally agree with you. I think that's a potent sentiment that means a lot, because at the end of the day, the only thing that separates us is that, our brains don't match our body. Like, we're not different than cis people. We're all just human beings. Like, we're all more similar than we think. And I think people kind of have this idea that trans people are separate from themselves and living a fully different experience. And like, well, we do experience life differently. It's a lot more similar than people give it credit for. And I think, as you tell your story, as I tell mine, the more people share, the more it's open, and the more open people become about it, the more accepting. And in my lifetime, I've seen it only get better on the whole. And I think that'll continue. I know the world, and especially where I'm at, like in America right now, it's a lot harder, and it's bad for people. Oh, and it's bad in the UK as well. It's bad all over the world. We're going through a rough period right now socially. but it will come back around. It goes in cycles, and we have to keep perspective that overall it's getting better and people are getting more open-minded and more accepting. And I'll say that my experience I talk to many cis bodybuilders, both women and men, the people at my gym, trainers, people in the industry, and 99% have all been so accepting and so supportive and so nice. And like, mostly people are very, very accepting and learning to accept our differences and appreciate them. And I think we see like on news channels that trans women in sports, and they're being stigmatized, and trans people are bad or whatever that gets put on the news. Is like, that bigotry is actually such a minority position, and we think it's more prevalent than it sometimes is. Like,
I agree. I have had a pretty positive experience of being open as a trans man on the whole, like you're saying. And I think a powerful part of your message is that you said essentially that if you zoom out, things have gotten much better over time. I think right now for the trans community, life is a lot easier. Like, just think 100 years ago, there was no access to hormones. There were no words for, or mostly, there were very few words to define how we feel. And if you uttered them, you would be ostracized and in some situations potentially even killed. Not that it doesn't happen now, unfortunately, but I think now we have access to hormones, we have words to talk to people about how we feel. It's much easier to help people understand and to help them see how we're more similar than, as you say, people assume. And we have access to more resources to educate ourselves and understand ourselves better. And as you say, unfortunately, the loudest voices are always the voices of the minority. So if you spend a lot of time online, it can seem like a lot of the world is against us. But I think it is important to have that ability to zoom out a little bit and realize actually it's not as bad as it seems, even though now things are really rough in the States, but also in the UK and in other parts of the world as well. And Lucy, I'm aware that I've kept you a bit longer than I thought, a bit longer than the hour. And I think it's a beautiful bow to put on this episode to end on these positive notes. So I want to wrap it up here, and I want to give you the opportunity to tell people where they can find you, get in touch with you, follow your story if they want, and then I'm going to add the link or any links that you're going to give me to the show notes so people can click on it and just get in touch with you or follow you on social media.
fantastic. Thank you, Nikias. Like, I've enjoyed the conversation. It's been great and fascinating talking with you and hearing your story and sharing mine too. So thank you for having me on. I really appreciate it. Um, as far as me right now, the only social that I'm putting time into is my Instagram currently. So people can follow me there, and that's Lucy Litsit, Lucy.Litsit. I had other platforms, but I've let them go and deleted them because of their associations politically for now. So follow me on Instagram. I share my pump pics and my stories and my competitions. I talk to a lot of people in DMs. I'm always happy to share experiences and chat with people, so feel free to reach out.
Awesome. Thank you, Lucy, for being on the podcast and being open to coming on and for sharing your story so honestly. It was, as you said, it was great for me as well and fascinating to talk to you and get this opportunity today. So thank you very much. Thank you, dear listeners and viewers, for tuning into this episode, and I will talk to you next time.